Welcome to JF with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today, we are welcoming back Professor Jeffery Blutinger, the head of Jewish Studies at Cal State Long Beach, and he will be teaching a class this semester on Jewish humor. So, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's a laughing moment. Yes, happy to be here.
So, no, I really love this theme of humor, especially because the last year for Jews has not been the funniest. So, I wanted to start off with a joke. I'm sure we'll be telling a lot of jokes. We'll kind of trace the history of Jewish humor, maybe philosophize a little bit about it. But there's two old Jewish men bump into each other at a bus stop. Probably the original used a train stop, and one of them is just looking distraught and upset, and the other one is looking joyful and jubilant. And the one that's very happy looks at his friend and says, hey, why are you so sad? And the guy says, what do you mean? Look at the news. Every day I read the Jewish Journal or I read the local Jewish magazine, and it's terrible. Anti-Semitism is up. There are anti-Semites in the universities. There's anti-Semites, now in Congress and the right and the left. Why are you so happy? And he says, Mendel, you're reading Jewish news. It's much more exciting if you read the non-Jewish news. There it says the Jews control the banks and the media and, the international world. We're on top of everything. So for me, this really, I think, personifies the idea of Jewish humor, because in a way, and hopefully we'll get that talk back and forth about this, Jews have used humor for thousands of years as a way of dealing with very extreme negative conditions that they basically had no control over. So I'm curious, just to throw out a little bit of background, this is your first time ever teaching a class on Jewish humor. Was that connected to the last year being, very not funny?
No, actually, because this class was proposed 2 years ago. And last year when I tried to offer it, no one enrolled. There was 0 students. And so I had to get the class listed also in history. And then the chair of history made it an elective sort of thing where students could qualify for diversity by taking it. And now we have 17 or 18 students in the class. So I proposed this class long before the current crisis, but it has been a welcome relief. So every morning, 2 mornings a week, I spend an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes playing clips of jokes in Yiddish or the Marx Brothers. I have an hour and a half break, and then I go teach Holocaust. So my day has this really wide emotional swing to it.
That is fascinating. No, it's interesting because usually the way that my mind works is I like to do things chronologically, but I have a feeling this podcast probably, we won't really get to skip the chronology. You mentioned the Holocaust, so let's actually start there because it's interesting. There was an article published a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who published it, but basically, talking about humor during the Holocaust. And it's a fascinating book and a fascinating study. There's a couple different articles about it because it shows that the Jews that were in, places like Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz actually told jokes. And some of the survivors that came out that, eventually came to either Israel or America afterwards, some of them actually published some of this. There was a book published in Hebrew in Yad Vashem a couple of years ago, literally jokes from the Holocaust. And so, even at the darkest times, this was still a part of life. As crazy as it is. So, do you think that's just, is this part of the human experience? What is this? I would not have guessed, without reading this, that there would have been people telling jokes in concentration camps.
So I'm not familiar with that research or article, but it doesn't surprise me. Because there were things, so for example, in a lot of concentration camps, there wasn't work on Sunday. So Sunday afternoons were sometimes free. And guards would listen to music, and then the prisoners would kind of crowd below. There'd be some guard playing a record, and the prisoners would listen to it. Or sometimes prisoners would gather and sing together. And then prisoners would tell stories. There's a whole book that came out of recipes where women would try to imagine what they want to cook when they finally have food. And they kind of put together this cookbook, a fantasy cookbook for women who had no food and were starving. And not all the recipes really work because they're imaginary, but there were people who did a lot to try to keep their spirits up because those are systems designed to break you. So it doesn't surprise me that people looked at humor because they looked to music and they looked to other things to try to keep their morale under the worst possible conditions. I think to your earlier point about humor as a survival mechanism, I think that's certainly true. A lot of humor is that. Let's not forget, however, that not all humor is about relieving tensions or coping. Sometimes a pie in the face, to paraphrase Freud, is just a pie in the face.
I love that. I
I
actually
have
went
a joke about, I want to tell you it because the
oh,
cigar.
please.
So cigar, because Freud collected Jewish jokes. And he actually wrote a book on humor, which it's not the funniest book. And the fact is, when you dissect jokes, they cease to be funny. So that's what we don't do. But this was his favorite Jewish joke. So there was a patient in a mental hospital who insisted that he was so religious he could only eat kosher food. And he was insisting, you must serve me kosher food. You can't serve me pork flesh. You know, chazarai, you can't make me eat it. I want kosher food. I'm religious. This went on for weeks, and they finally agreed to give him kosher food. A couple days later, doctor comes by the hospital, and there he sees the same patient sitting outside on Shabbos, smoking a cigar. So the doctor goes over to him and says, Herr Schwartz, I thought you said you were so religious, so observant, you had to have kosher food. And here I see you sitting smoking on the Sabbath. And the patient smiled and looked at him and said, but doctor, you forgot. I'm insane. That was Freud's favorite.
That's
anyway,
good.
So yeah, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and doesn't always mean something.
Yeah. So I went and actually looked it up. So Viktor Frankl, who wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote this in the 1940s, just for listeners, background. He was a psychologist who was already practicing before the Holocaust and then went through as a survivor, but then at the end wrote about the sort of existential or psychological experience. So he has a quote saying that humor was one of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation during the Holocaust. And so he's even writing about this in the 1940s. I mean, that's pretty early.
And I will say, this is something I have to deal with when I take students to Europe on a Holocaust tour, and I talk about it in class as well. Because sometimes when things are so horrific, we can't handle it. I'm not talking about as a prisoner in a camp level of horror, simply as a tourist coming to Auschwitz. Sometimes it's just devastating and overwhelming. And you will see, and I tell my students, sometimes you will see people acting inappropriately in a place of horror, like posing for photographs and smiling. Hey, here's a selfie under the Arbeitsmarktfreigeld. And the first thought is they're completely douchebags and they're clueless, which is always a safe bet, right? But it could also mean that then they are actually feeling too much. Because the easiest way to distance yourself from horror is through humor. It creates a safe space and it takes you out of the horror. And so I tell students, if you find yourself joking, don't beat yourself up about it. Just recognize what's happening. It's too horrific. And then try to come back in and be as open to the experience as you can. But then sometimes humor is our only way of keeping sane in the face of absolute terror. And we see that all the time.
Yeah. I think another angle of humor, and this, maybe will start to root us in some Jewish history, is also a way of being able to tell truths that people are too afraid to tell, explicitly, right? So if you make a joke about something, we're both obviously very stereotypical Ashkenazi Jews. So, you make a self-deprecating joke about, Ashkenazi Jews. Okay, haha, we can laugh about it. That's very different than, if we were to say stereotypes. In a more historical perspective, I mean, probably the Jewish day or idea that's most associated with jokes is a holiday of Purim, right? Just to give, the 20-second background, right? On Purim, we read from the book of Esther in the Tanakh, which of course, many scholars think is an entire book of satire, right? I mean, the entire thing, you have this, doofus, prime minister or king, Achashverosh, who doesn't really seem to know right for wrong, and it's very unclear. And then you have this sort of like comically evil character, Haman or Haman, who's just, such a doofus, he doesn't have any social cues. And then of course, the classic good guy, Mordecai, and unlike other stories of the Torah that at least seem to paint a little bit more nuance, and they're austere in terms of painting the picture. I mean, this story just kind of reads of as satire, which is then inspired, I mean, already from the rabbis in the Talmud. There's the infamous or famous statement, every Purim you're supposed to drink so much that you can't even tell the difference between Mordechai and Haman. But Purim's become a day in the Jewish calendar all about punching up to some extent, right? I mean, you have these, very hierarchical communities, especially, we're talking early modern period of Judaism. So say the 16th, 17th, 18th century, where, I mean, these days rabbis are, whatever, everybody can complain about the rabbi. But if you're in the, the shtetl in the 1800s in Poland, you are not complaining about the rabbi, right? The rabbi is, the boss,
They did.
Well, yeah, but not
the rabbis complained about it. That's why I know that. So.
No, but nobody. I mean, nowadays, I don't think the board would hesitate to, complain, or even, during services, you'll have people talking about it right there. I mean, it was really reserved mostly for, this idea of the Purim spiel, which was specifically a day where you can, dress up as the rabbi and pretend to be, and basically be this sort of explicit fool as a way, again, of trying to punch up. I mean, you obviously have these, you have this ancient, pagan idea of festival, which is very similar, right? This idea where there's one day a year or 1 week a year where everything is flipped, and you can make fun of the elites, and it gives the common man time to talk about it. A lot of interesting historic theories about this, right? Maybe this actually preserves hierarchy in some way, giving people a 1 day to actually make fun of them. But I would love to we start by, is Purim a good place to start, right? Is this a good way to think about Jewish humor? Is this unique to the Jewish experience, or is this just sort of our version of something that every culture has?
So in a short answer, it's our version of what every culture has. Durkheim, I think, has talked about this. It is a tension and release holiday. So you have a tension release holiday immediately followed or closely followed by a recommitment holiday. So in this, that you have Mardi Gras, and then you have Lent, right? For if you're Catholic, right? Mardi Gras, very much like Purim. People dress up, people get drunk, people party, do make all sorts of reversal of roles and hierarchy, and then you recommit with fasting and Lent leading to Easter. For Jews, it's about a month apart, because we have tension release with Purim, and a month later we have Pesach, right? But of course, Pesach doesn't. We spend the entire month preparing for Pesach. So in fact, you recommit pretty quick after Purim ends. You start getting rid of the chametz. So that kind of that fits that pattern. I think certainly punching up is really common, and a lot of Jewish humor is punching up and making fun of rabbis. Purim maybe a little less so, because it's so, in the medieval period, it's all about sex jokes at the expense of Ahasuerus. I mean, they sing songs about how big the members of the various patriarchs were and what they could do with them. It's really, there's a lot of scatological sexual humor in the Renaissance in Purim. The rabbis weren't really happy with the Purim spiel, because they thought it was a little too low class. But think of the Helm jokes, right? Right? Almost all cultures have a city or country of fools. What's special about Helm is, as the Jewish, I mean, there is a city called Helm in Poland. It's not a city of fools. It's just, that's the Jewish version of it. But what's interesting about the Helm people is, who are they making fun of? They're not just foolish. They're foolish in a very specific way. They're always called the wise men of Helm, because they want to reason their answer. And that's the humor, because they reason so poorly, it leads them to a funny result. So who's being satirized? It's the rabbis. The wise men of Helm are rabbis who come up with really foolish answers using logic. So a Helm story might be, a man goes to the rabbi of Helm and says, which is more important, the sun or the moon? And the rabbi says, of course, the moon. The moon shines when it's night and we need light. The sun shines in the daytime when we don't need it at all, right? That's a Helm joke. It's making fun of the reasoning. So there's a Oh, that's a long too involved joke, but there's a lot of these jokes that where the people have come cut down some trees at the top of the hill and they carry them down the hill, and someone not from Chum says, you did it wrong, you should have rolled them down the hill. So they carry the trees back up and then they roll them down because they want to do it right. So that's an example. So they're constantly trying to be wise, but they're really foolish. So who's the target? It's really rabbis.
Yeah,
So
I mean, and this is sort of their version of sort of the ivory tower jokes. I mean, you kind of have the same thing here, which is a very fascinating again way of punching up. The other way in which Jews have punched up, which this is even true from the Midrashic times, so we're talking 1800 years ago, is anti-Christian polemic humor as well. I mean, that you see the Midrash and Talmud sort of have that sprinkled all over, just for listeners that might not be aware. I mean, the Talmud is fascinating because, obviously Christianity, I mean, really developed in the 1st and 2nd century, but really didn't start to proliferate until the 4th and 5th centuries, CE, which is the exact same time the Talmud was being, created and redacted and discussed. And so, but the rabbis were obviously afraid to explicitly criticize Christianity in the Talmud because, especially after, Rome turns Christian, you don't exactly, tell the Roman Empire, your religion is foolish, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of, veiled hints to criticisms of Christianity in the Talmud. And then there's also, uncensored versions of the Talmud, which actually do explicitly have, the most radical, I don't even know, this isn't like a haha joke, but, the Talmud says that, Jesus is boiling in a pot of semen. And this is, in the Talmud.
Have you read Toldot Yeshu?
Yeah. Can you explain for listeners what Toldot Yeshu is?
So Toldot Yeshu, we know from the church fathers that they were who write in the 3rd and 4th century that the Jews are spreading nasty rumors about Jesus. At some point, we know that Toldot Yeshu simply means the life of Jesus. It's probably written down in a variety of places, somewhere 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th century, because they're radically different versions of it. All of them, I think, share the idea that Jesus's mother, Mary, was raped by her drunken neighbor, Pantera, while she was in menstruation. And after that, they just go off in different directions. So there's no single version of it. The one I taught this, it's basically, just be aware, it's not historically true. This is not some secret text of a counter history of Jesus preserved by the rabbis, passed down in secret. It's medieval rabbis trying to imagine the worst things possible to say about Jesus and using their imagination, letting their imagination run wild with it. So Jesus, first of all, let's set aside the biological problems of Jesus being a child of menstruation. It just means he's tameh, he's ritually impure in his origins, and it's a taboo anyhow. So my favorite version is he gets control of the secret name of God from the temple, and he's doing magic with it. So the rabbis get Judas to do the same thing, and Judas and Jesus are dogfighting flying. They're doing the Superman flying over the skies of Galilee, fighting with each other. And it says in the main text, and this gets to my favorite footnote of all time. In the main text, it says that Judas urinates on Jesus, which makes them ritually impure, and they fall from heaven, fall from the skies. Except, as you probably know, urine is not a bodily fluid that makes one ritually impure. So it has to be a euphemism. And there's a footnote. It says, textual variant. Hu shevach zer alav, umitumeh mishkav zachar. Judas ejaculates on Jesus, hence the boiling semen later, causing them both to become ritually impure through same-sex contact, which would make them ritually impure. They both permanently lose the power of the name of God. They fall out of the sky, and that's how Jesus is captured. And then because he can't, he's hung or hanged, from some bush, I forget, like an asparagus stalk or something, because he can't go on a tree. He's executed by hanging from some big bush. But yeah, it's pretty wild. I had to warn the students that it was pretty secular.
I was gonna
But
say, I'm afraid, when I teach classes on, medieval Jewish history, that I'm gonna say, the Christians persecuted the Jews, and somebody will complain about my class. I can only imagine,
so
what.
I first day of class, I had the first time I ever had to do a full trigger warning saying this is a course on ethnic humor. We will be reading and hearing and seeing jokes that are offensive. There
Yeah,
will
and
be
it is
racist.
important to know. I mean, just to for listeners that are shocked, and this is your story and told at Yeshu, or the Boiling Seaman. I mean, this is just scratching the surface of early medieval to Jewish jokes about Christianity. I mean, this is at a time when Christians were blaming Jews for the plague and blaming Jews for the death of Christian babies, and Jews were constantly being given ultimatums of convert or get killed, and so this is the only power that Jews had. I mean, there was no military power, no political power, no religious power. Every time Jews and Christians were engaged in public disputes, that was always, rigged against the Jews, because it was just to make a public mockery of Judaism. And so, texts, but specifically, the humor within texts, were really the only way of Jews being able to have a voice of a little bit punching back and saying, there is some foolishness on the other side, from a less humorous, but also kind of satirical perspective. I mean, one of the most famous medieval works is Judah Halevi's The Kuzari, which, you have this sort of historically fictional account of, a king who brings up, a philosopher, a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim. It sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's really not. And the king's, asking, all the different groups, he takes the philosopher, tell me about God. The philosopher says it, and the king basically says, this is too universalized, this doesn't tell me what I should be doing with my life, and brings in Christianity, and basically, says, this sort of just kind of seems a little bit foolish with a lot of like extra stuff. And then, with the imam, it's the same thing. And then finally he's like, well, I wasn't going to ask Jews because everybody knows Jews are the lowliest of people, but, I guess I'll find in some rabbi, right? Like there is some implicit, even self-deprecating humor there, but even that's a way of, again, having some voice when, again, the vast majority, 99% of Jewish Christian relationships, at least in the medieval era, were almost always negative and sad and lachrymose and, these terrible ultimatums. This is where these jokes really arise from, right? So in my mind, it's very similar to, say we started by talking about, Holocaust humor, Jews sort of punching up during that time. I don't know if you have anything to add before.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple things. So first, you're absolutely right. Remember, these are Jews who are thinking, the Christians, they're always going around saying how Jesus was the best and we're supposed to be humiliated and God's punishing us. Let us tell you who he really was, right? This is who he really was. This is what he did. This is what happened to him. So this is really much about responding to oppression. There's a really wonderful article called "The Ghost in the Privy." If you ever heard of Nittelnacht, which is a Hasidic custom of the night before Christmas Eve, what you do on Christmas Eve, and how you're not supposed to study Talmud or Torah on Christmas Eve because the powers of evil are exalted in the world. Her name, Rebecca Sharbach, did this amazing article called "The Ghost in the Privy," in which she traces this custom back to Christians. And if you've ever seen or read Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right? There's this Christian belief that ghosts emerge on Christmas Eve and they go abroad. And there's all these protective charms against ghosts. Well, for Jews, it's just one ghost in particular. It's the ghost of Jesus that you have to protect yourself from, who's going to come up through your outhouse. And he's the ghost in the privy. And so you have to protect yourself against this ghost. It's really it's a wonderful, and it shows, by the way, again, we think of, okay, why, here we're talking about how separate the communities are, but here is a Jewish practice that comes from Christian cultural folk practice. It's just been changed when adopted by Jews. One thing about self-deprecatory humor, there's a myth among Jews that the reason Jews are so funny is we make fun of ourselves, which we do. But guess what? It's also true of every other minority group. It's minority humor overwhelmingly is self-deprecatory, right? For obvious reasons, which is you're performing before a majority crowd, how to make them at ease. Before you start heckling me, I'm going to make fun of myself.
Well, this is like the entire motif of the jester, in universal literature, right? You come in and you're so silly, and so therefore, hopefully the king won't kill you if you make him
And
laugh because you slip on a banana peel or something.
you can tell truth. So there's Herschel of Ostropol is one of the most famous Yiddish jesters. He worked for a Hasidic court in the late 18th, early 19th century, famous for his jokes. So one day, he was very poor, sitting at a table eating opposite a wealthy man, and the wealthy man's horrified at his table manners. And he looks at Herschel and he's disgusted. He said, "Look at the way you're eating. What separates you from a pig?" And Herschel looks up and says, "The table." Right? He's making a pointed reference at the other person. He does. There's a lot of those jokes. So one of the things we like. I was talking in class. Who's a trickster? Why do we like tricksters? Bugs Bunny is a trickster. All the students go with Loki as a trickster. I see Loki is sort of chaotic evil to chaotic neutral. Herschel's more chaotic good, if you know your D&D references. But we like tricksters because in general, their target is the wealthy, the powerful, the people who are high status, the snobs. Think of Groucho Marx is constantly, he's not scamming the poor, he's scamming the elite. And we like
Yeah,
that.
there also is a sense. I mean, I don't know if this fits in really with the elite paradigm, but I just see in culture today. I mean, when you listen to stand-up comedians, not talking about just Jews, but anybody, the range of jokes that they're willing to, a lot of it is, the type of sexist, or I won't say sexist, gendered, racial, jokes that you would never hear, in any other. I mean, I can't imagine any other scenario in which you would have a packed audience going to a theater and hearing a bunch of jokes, stereotyping every culture and every gender, and it not being, a far right, rally or something. And, here you have people of every, political view and people think it's hilarious. And yet they would never make those jokes, in their serious form, even though everybody's able to laugh at it. And so I think it is sort of a little bit of a release. And it's no mistake, I think, now when you look on Netflix or, now there's a bajillion streaming sites. So, on the front page, it's recent, comedy specials from everybody. That wasn't, I mean, okay, comedy was big 15 years ago, but, it wouldn't be front page of every streaming service. And so I do think, there is a little bit of a connection there where, as discourse, especially, say among, liberals writ large, there's so many things that, oh, don't talk about this, don't talk about this. But then somebody gets up, I'm thinking, one of my favorite stand-up specials from the last couple of years, Ari Shafir, who is a, he grew up Orthodox and now he's, very assimilated, he's
OTD?
What?
OTD?
Yeah, OTD off the derech, but atheist. He has an hour and a half stand-up special it's just called Jew. You can find it on YouTube, and it is like, I mean, self-deprecation is an understatement. I mean, it's just like making fun of Talmud and Jewish law and Jewish but it's done in such a funny way, and I don't know, it's one of my favorite bits, even though almost every piece of it is insulting to something that I spent my life in a serious way dedicated to. You still appreciate the humor there.
But it's interesting, if you go back to vaudeville, like over 110, 120 years ago, what's going on? It's a lot of it is ethnic humor. In fact, there's been an argument that American humor from the beginning was ethnic humor of in the sense of people who are established making fun of the people crossing the ocean, people from the frontier making fun of city people who came to visit them, or when frontier people came back to the cities. All those, a lot of humor was based on that. You went to vaudeville stage in 1900, 1910, a lot of ethnic humor. Doesn't matter who the actor, they're making fun of the Irish, they're making fun of the Italians, they're making fun of the Jews, they're making fun of the Germans. And they all have their stereotypes. And of course, African Americans. But here's the thing, with the exception of African Americans who sat with, because vaudeville was segregated, so the African Americans sat upstairs in the balcony. Downstairs, the audience was all Jewish, Irish, Italian, Germans, who were going to see themselves made fun of. And what that meant was comics really couldn't be hostile to the same degree, because if they were really hostile against the Irish are going to stop. Irish audience is going to stop coming. So they all made fun of each other in a kind of joking, well, literally joking, but in a rather gentle way. They all embraced the stereotypes, and the result is that because everyone was making fun of each other, they were all creating a kind of community together.
Yeah.
The exception is the African Americans. So there you could see a lot harsher jokes because they weren't worried about losing their business. But setting that as a major caveat, the ethnic jokes on stage created a sense of a community in which, even though Irish and Italians and Jews may not get along well outside the theater, and were living right next door to each other in the Lower East Side, on stage, they could all, in the theater, they could all kind of be there together making fun and
Yeah,
enjoy.
I mean, it makes sense. Listen, I remember, years ago when I was an undergrad, I took a class on, a social psychology class. And one of the papers we read, I'm, completely forgetting, who and when I read this, but the argument that it was making was that, okay, so everybody is aware of the experience, either very close siblings or, you see this even more with, tight-knit friend groups where everybody has the stereotype of, oh, that's George. He's a mess, oh, he can't, read to save his life, whatever. Like everyone who's ever had a good friend understands this sort of, you insult them and, you make jokes and you constantly push it. And the argument this was making was this was actually a psychological tool to test out how close you really are to somebody. Because, if I'm talking to you for the first time and, I want to, I'm going to be on my best behavior and I don't really know if you like me or not. So I'm not going to say anything. And, I'm going to be, but if, this is our 50th conversation and we come on and you see that like my hair is messy, you might just say, what, did you just wake up, or whatever it is. And that almost is a psychological way of you saying like, yes, we are this close, that's not going to cause you to stop talking to me forever. And I think, that seems to be true also from what you're saying there, where it's just a way of, obviously it drops off at some point once it turns into mockery. I think that's an interesting different line of what's humorous and when does it become mocking. There's some fascinating debates even about, I don't know, cultural appropriation, right? I remember a student asking me a few years ago, what do I think of, Amazon was selling, a Hasidic costume for Halloween, right? I don't know, personally, I didn't really have a problem with it. In my mind, it becomes a problem once it comes with, the bundle of money and the big nose, right? That seems to get a little bit into mockery, but yeah, no, exactly.
They still, I've seen them. I saw them last summer. They still sell the little Hasidic figure with the gold zloty coin. But how do you feel about Amazon selling what they thought were Sukkot boxes, but
what
actually are Tuchus boxes? You don't know this? Oh, this is the biggest thing in the last 2 days.
Oh my God. Okay.
For those of you watching later, go Google this. Forward has an article out last night. Amazon, some company on Amazon that sells all sorts of little things for different communities wanted to create Sukkot boxes, but they didn't realize that Hebrew is written from right to left. So that Sukkot is spelled from left to right, which of course, if you read it, means Tuchus.
Which means but in
so
behind
so the idea normally if you're writing if you write the letters the wrong way, it comes out garbage, but in this case it's just incredibly funny. And then of course all the images of these Sukkot boxes, there's a Zaidi who's splitting matzah while reading the Seder, or a little girl lighting a Chanukiah while they're eating sofganiyot.
This almost seems like the Jewish Voice for Peace trying to have a Passover Seder.
That's exactly the forward mentioned that. Yes, the mention that.
Where they got the Hebrew wrong.
Yes.
Okay, so here's another joke, and
no Jews involved in either case. So
yes, probably not. I mean, this doesn't seem very hard to cross-check this with someone who knows Hebrew. You would think.
Yeah.
So two Jews are walking down the street, and they pass by a church, and there's a huge billboard outside the church. Any Jew who'll come in and listen to our pitch about why Christianity is the true religion we will give $50 to. And so, the two guys, I don't know, we'll call them Mordechai and Shmuel. So Mordechai starts to walk into the church, and Shmuel says, Mordechai, what are you doing? First of all, we have to get somewhere. Second of all, Jews aren't allowed in churches, or, they're going to tell you all these lies and whatever. And Shmuel says, no, what do you mean? It's an easy $50. They're not going to convince me. I'll be out in 10 minutes. So, Shmuel goes in, and Mordechai's, anxiously waiting. And, 10 minutes later, Shmuel comes out, and Mordechai says, new Shmuel, did you get the $50? And he turns and says, is that all you people think about?
It's funny. I was thought in a different direction. There's a different. I'm sorry. I was thinking of a joke. It's the rabbi, priest, and the minister are jokes. So the rabbi, priest, and minister are golfing, and it's taking forever. The group in front of them is moving so slow. Hours and hours go by, and finally they complain, why is it moving so slowly? And they said, well, the group of golfers in front of you is blind. So the priest says, "Oi, there for the grace of God go I," and the minister's like, "Oi, we shouldn't, who am I to judge?" And the rabbi says, "What? They couldn't play at night?"
That's right.
Sorry, it is a little bit, yeah. They actually, the other,
you have the same. I mean, it's funny because I was, racking
this is one, because there used to be a YouTube channel, Old Jews Telling Jokes, and a lot of them are vaudeville jokes, very old jokes. And one of them is a German, an Englishman, a Frenchman, and a Jew are rescued from the desert after being lost in the desert for days. And the German says, "I'm hot, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I must have a beer." And the Englishman says, "I'm hot, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I must have some tea." And the Frenchman says, "I'm hot, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I must have a glass of wine." And the Jew says, "I'm hot, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I must have diabetes."
Sorry, funny. I thought so. There's another. I mean, the other Jew on an island joke. This is
yeah,
they come on and
that's the synagogue. I saw that in real life, by the way. I actually saw that in real life.
Wait, let me tell the joke for listeners
okay.
that didn't get the reference, although this is a pretty well-known one. But the Jew gets, he's on an island for a couple of years, and then he gets rescued, and he wants to show the rescuers around the islands, this is where I ate, and this is my little gym, and these are the two synagogues. And they said, why two synagogues? And he's like, this is the one I pray at every day, and this is the one I would never step foot into. So
I saw that in real life. Well, it wasn't a synagogue. I was in the ghetto in Venice, which is the first ghetto. And there are two Chabadniks walking in front of me, because one lived there and one was visiting them. And there are two kosher restaurants in the ghetto. And the friend visiting says, "Shall we go to, kosher restaurant Aleph?" And the Chabad says, "Oh no, I never go there." Again, it was the same punchline, but in real life, there was, that he had to have the kosher restaurant he ate at and the kosher restaurant he would never eat at.
That's amazing.
It just yeah.
So Time Magazine, sometime in the late 70s, did the study. I don't know what this was based off of, but they estimated that 80% of stand-up comedians in America were Jewish. I'm going to guess the number is not as big now, but what accounts for, I mean, in this case, it really is true that, Jews control the comedy scene, at least, late 20th century. I mean, why?
So the period of this sort of golden age of Jewish humor is post-war in particular. And then what you have is you've got a ton of Jewish comics on TV, and you've got a ton of in film, and you've got a ton of Jewish comics doing various forms of stand-up. And a lot of the argument seems to be, and I haven't taught it yet, so I don't really, I was saying before, I really learned something when I teach it, and I haven't taught it yet. But my guess is, from what I've read so far, is that what Jews did was use their comedy that was addressing Jewish anxieties and made it to help Americans facing somewhat similar anxieties. So what are the anxieties that American Jews are facing in the post-war period? This is the time in which American Jews are leaving the inner cities and moving to the suburbs. This is the time of suburbanization in America. A lot of people are moving out to the suburbs. And this is, there's a lot of anxiety in America about suburban, and some of it, it gets expressed, the beatniks are rebels against that culture, the materialism of the post-war boom. And Jewish comics are addressing those issues that a lot of Americans are struggling with. And there are a lot of Jews are dealing with that. And those jokes resonate, even though they're not necessarily Jewish specific, they resonate out into American society. So Jewish comics are in sync with what Americans were worried about. Now, at a certain point, those issues begin to pass and a lot of other comics come in. So Jewish comics aren't that same thing. And it's funny, we talk about the ethnic humor. I don't know if you've ever been to a stand-up club. So I went many years ago in grad school. I had a friend who was trying to break into stand-up, and he said, "Hey, it's open. I've signed up, and if I bring enough friends, they'll let me come back next week, because we pay a cover, and that's the way it worked." And so I went, and it's sort of like you could see the sort of classes of stand-up. So there were the straight guys who were making jokes about how they went to comedy to get laid. Then there were the kind of the Seinfeld wannabes who were doing observational comics.
Okay.
Then there was my big fat Greek, Cambodian, Puerto Rican, Haitian wedding, sort of like, here I am, an ethnic person growing up in America, surrounded by, Anglos. Let me take jokes about that. And then there was the one professional comic who was funny, right? But that was the thing. So people are, there are these different sets that people try to do. And so not all what used to be sort of Jewish dominance over a certain comic form, less so now, because just America's changed and the Jewish community's changed, and the issues that are funny for Jews, or the issues that Jews want to make jokes about or address, aren't always now the same ones that America as a whole is dealing with. But hey, we still got Jon Stewart and Larry David, who I can't stand because I can't do cringe comedy. I'm dreading that week of the course where we're covering cringe comedy and I have to play a Larry David clip from Curb Your
The problem, I mean, so maybe I'm the crusty old man. So Jon Stewart is, interesting because I've been listening to him for years, but especially in the last year, he's come out not anti-Israel, but he's been mocking the sort of what I believe to be the correct view of what, say Israel, right now. I mean, we're talking on Friday, Israel just potentially took out Nasrallah again. We're not going to know until the end of the podcast, but he has all these statements. Exactly. But he has all these, jokes of mocking, Israel's de-escalation plan long-term is to short-term escalation. And then he turns to the side of the camera and he's like, this is the big joke. That is the policy that I think is going to work. I mean, separate than getting into a Middle East policy discussion, there does seem to be a type of a popular Jewish humor now that is almost like, the Yom Kippur davening. It's like, we're terrible as Jews, yes, we have too much power. And that I think, is a little bit frustrating, but I can guess it was always frustrating historically. So maybe that's just
So I don't know. I see a lot of different Jewish stand-ups, and some are like that and some are not. And I'm thinking of the woman, Jessica Slate? Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, comedian,
okay.
or Jessica Curson. I played that for my mother because Jessica Curson, a stand-up Jewish lesbian comic, really funny. She talks about the problem of performing for old Jewish audiences, and because they talk during the show because they feel they can, and they talk really loud because they're deaf. And then she recounts the conversations she hears from the stage, which anyway, but so there's still people doing that kind of stuff. I don't know. I think there were always Jews. I mean, first of all, Jon Stewart was always political, and he was always making political asides and commenting, particularly over 9/11 and the need to fund surviving, the fire crews and the policemen who were injured and wounded in that. So he's always been had a strong political edge to him. So I'm not as surprised by that, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm trying to think of the more contemporary.
My favorite current comedian is Bill Maher. I mean, I think he's, and he's also not a Bill Maher guy. I mean, he's
Sorry,
also half Jewish. I mean, unclear. I forgot which side.
the dumb
And
son. No,
what?
it's hard.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think because he doesn't pull punches from either side, and he has his cringier moments, but he's generally consistently funny. I consistently laugh when I listen to him,
I
as
guess
opposed to yeah,
it's
go
the
for it.
whole anti-woke thing, which I think I don't agree with. I think anti-woke just means anti-liberal, but that we're getting much more serious at this point.
Yeah. This is well, maybe another time we could and should have that conversation. But when I listen to it, I mean, there right now it seems like in people who want to do politics and humor, it at a certain point just becomes only politics. Right? I'm thinking of John Oliver, who is funny sometimes, but his last week tonight comedy routines sound like you're just listening to a news report with like a joke every 5 minutes, and it's like, okay, I don't need to hear another spin on the same thing that you would get reading a New York Times article just from a comedian.
It's hard to, given the political stakes right now, it's hard to tell neutral jokes that both sides can agree. Can you tell a joke? Can you tell political jokes that you would unite Republicans and Democrats? Hard to think
I
of.
think it would be possible. It just doesn't seem like there are many people who are interested in doing that, because I think comedy has become partisan in some way. I mean, again, the other sort of proverbial elephant.
Yeah, it's just
well, no, I was gonna say the other elephant in the room is that I think part of Trump's success is that he's funny. I mean, not that, to say nothing about whether or not you agree with anything he's doing, but you get up there, especially in 2016. I mean, during those, I remember watching those debates. I was in, grad school.
Yeah.
This was far before anyone thought he had a chance. I mean, we were cracking up. I would say we were sending posts of those debates to all of our friends. The 2016, him Hillary debates. I mean, they were funny. I mean, he's lost a lot of that. He's kind of just gone off the deep end in a lot of ways that is not funny. But I think that also, I mean, politics is also a tool of charisma in some way that you can weaponize. I mean, for good or for bad.
But he's not. Here's the thing: he's not funny to Democrats, and in the same way,
the only reason
Democrats will watch him to make fun of him, but they're not. They're laughing at him, not with his jokes.
A little bit. I mean, I've been a Democrat the whole time, and again, not all Democrats, but I think part of the reason why the news, I mean, one of the things that everybody's pointing to in 2015 and 2016 in the primary, this is again, eons ago, but the reason why the news covered him so much was because he was this sort of like jester-like figure, coming on, and basically he had all his insults, lying Ted Cruz and, whatever. Boring, from forgetting all the names from 2015. I'm sure I could look it up, but
little Marcos.
Yeah, little Marcos, but then also, Jeb Bush, was like boring Jeb. I don't even know if he had a nickname for him.
I don't remember if he was low energy or that was just Biden low energy.
Low energy. I don't know. He's now lost the edge. But no, it is really, really interesting, just the role in wider society. I know that our time is short. We're recording on a Friday. The one last thing that I just wanted to bring up, in Israel, there's a comedy show called Hayehudim Ba'im, or the Jews are coming.
I love that show. I play clips.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So I always, they can't translate it to English fast enough. Most of them are still in Hebrew. You can find some in English. Just for listeners, these are very short bits that either are making fun of something from the Bible or something from the Talmud or even something in modern day Israeli culture. What's interesting about that is a couple of years ago, there was a big court case in Israel because the ultra-Orthodox community actually tried to get that off of, Israel's a lot more, governmental control than America, right? It's a lot more socialistic. And so, they wanted to get it off of national radio and national TV, and, they ended up losing. But there also was a very interesting way of, this is, if you're secular in Israel, in a lot of ways, you do feel like you're punching up because the ultra-Orthodox, controls so many important institutions and, so much political discourse. So I think, for listeners that are hoping to get new comedy recommendations out of this, I would check out Yehudim Bayim. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Specific clips that I use in class of Yehudim Bayim, the Jews are coming. I do the one where Abraham announces to Isaac and Ishmael the covenant of circumcision. Hint, they're, spoiler alert, they're less than pleased. Moses having announced the 10 Commandments, taking questions, complete with stutter, and getting very upset with the questions that he's getting. Then the other one, Purim, Mordecai calls Esther in saying he's found a solution to their problem, and Esther raises all the objections in the Talmud, saying, doesn't this make me a whore? You're sending me to be with a strange man. You're getting something out of it. That makes me a whore, isn't it? Right? And, good punchline for there. And then the other one I love, but I don't show it, is they do it. It's an ad for Singing Rabbi. And it's all death metal. It's Bible lyrics as death metal. There was a clip. I can't find it anymore.
Well, so that's actually my favorite clip on YouTube. It's a 30-second clip, and it's making fun of, in the Orthodox community, I grew up in the Orthodox community.
Yeah.
There's all these bands that play these, again, you listen, the only lyrics that you listen to in the Orthodox community are Jewish lyrics. So usually it's very nice, verse, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, or, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? Love your brother as yourself, set to some nice music. And this clip is a bunch of, it starts out as that, right? You have this rabbi, strumming a guitar, but then they start to talk about all of the verses in the Torah that say you kill people. So, you burn the witch,
the adulterer,
everybody who
and the adulteress.
You kill the, somebody engaging in homosexual activity, and then it's set to death metal. It's about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I've probably watched this clip 100 times. I still crack up. They actually made a second one of those.
Really? Send me.
Yeah. So in the second one, this was also very well done. It was just to give listeners a tiny bit of background. In the Orthodox community, there's a Jewish legal prohibition against listening to women sing, right? So it's a big deal, right? In the Orthodox community, you would never have, a singer who's a female perform in front of males. So this is, a rabbi and a woman that are singing together, and, he sings, and then when it comes time for her part, the audio goes blank, and there's like a black, edited or, box over her face. And then it goes back to him singing, and then it does it again. And it's also just like very in your face humor.
Please send that to me. I want to see.
Yes, I definitely will do.
One thing when I teach Hasidism, there's a really, because Hasidism has the practice of taking secular music and sanctifying it. My go-to clip now is a wedding video from, I think, 10 years ago. It's called Bas Kol, and it's taken from the song Fifth Harmony, I'm Worth It. But it's a song about how the groom is worth it because 40 days before he was born, a Bas Kol went out announcing who his beshert was. And it's a filmed at a Hasidic wedding. And I always play for the students and say, can you recognize the tune? And they do. They can they know it, but they have trouble remembering where it comes from. But if you go Google it, it's a fun clip.
Amazing. Well, good luck with the course. I'm curious to hear how it goes throughout the semester. Maybe sometime in a couple months after you're finished, we can do another episode. But Jeffery Blutinger, thank you so much for chatting about this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I'll say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Shana Tova, because that's coming up soon too.
Yes, you as well.